Welcome back, everybody. My name is Haley, otherwise known as the Fictional Scholar, and today we are back with another character analysis from one of my favorite TV shows, from one of my family's favorite TV shows. We are going to be covering James Gillies from Murdoch Mysteries. Murdoch Mysteries is a Canadian-based TV show that's kind of a detective show, and based in like the late 1800s, early 1900s in Toronto mostly. There are different places in Canada that the show covers and goes into. It's a fantastic show. My grandfather, my papa, is the one who got me and my family absolutely hooked on the show, mainly because he knew we were all going to absolutely adore this antagonist, James Gillies. Now, before we get into this analysis, I'm just gonna go ahead and put it out there that this is a spoiler warning, because we will be going deep into the character of James Gillies and all of his appearances. So if you haven't seen the show, or if you are watching the show and you don't know who James Gillies is, please exit now if you don't want to be spoiled, because I will be talking about everything here. With that being said, let's hop right into this analysis of James Gillies. So James Gillies first makes his appearance in Murdoch Mysteries as an antagonist, but kind of an unseen, unknown antagonist in season 2 of Murdoch Mysteries, where they're at the campus at a university where there's been a crime committed. And there has been a professor that has been murdered, and Detective Murdoch, our leading protagonist and our main character, he has been tasked with figuring out who killed this professor. And as he goes about, we are introduced to James Gillies and Robert Perry, and they are seemingly just students who are wanting to help Detective Murdoch along, who are wanting to see how an investigation works, because the classroom is all too theoretical. And this is where we are first introduced to kind of how cunning and intelligent James Gillies is, but it also is our first clue to his character, that he expects perfection and he expects everything to go his way. James Gillies as a character, he's very cunning, very, very, very intelligent. He's inquisitive, he's intuitive, he's very curious, and that is a big point of his character, is that his curiosity to his genius is his downfall. But besides all this and him being very deceptive, he's also very charismatic, and as an antagonist, we are drawn to like his character, which is perfect, because how else could we possibly want to see this character again if he wasn't likable, if he wasn't a good antagonist? So the show sets him up super, super well. And Murdoch is able to kind of figure it out, like, oh, well, James Gillies was the one who murdered his professor, and with the help of Robert Perry. Now Gillies is a lot more stoic. He's less emotional and less afraid when it comes to being targeted by the police, when it comes to the plan, this murder kind of unraveling and their perfect murder kind of falling apart. He doesn't really crack under the pressure, while as his partner, Robert Perry, instantly cracks. Robert didn't stand a chance against Murdoch. This episode kind of sets up two big things for James Gillies as a character and as an antagonist throughout the rest of his time on the show. Is one, he sees the downfall of working with a partner, because he can no longer trust anybody other than himself to do things right. And that is very much shown at his anger and his displeasure when Robert Perry basically flubs it. when Robert flubs it, that's when Gillies is like, all right, I'm disappointed. This was in his mind, he was like, this was supposed to go so much better. So that's the first point, is that Gillies, from then on out, he's working by himself, and that actually makes him so much more dangerous than when he worked with a partner. And the second point is that it pinpoints Detective Murdoch as his enemy, as his rival, as someone that Gillies looks at and says, this person matches my genius, and I want to test him. I want to play against him. So, with all this being said, the setup for his character is really done very nicely and very well. And for a few seasons, people just kind of tend to completely forget about James Gillies because he's supposed to be in a prison, hanged, dead. He's supposed to be dead, but he's not. But the one aspect of James Gillies' character that I like is that he does not fit the typical mold of a psychopath or a serial killer. He is kind of like a deviation of a sociopath in the way he approaches things, in the way he talks to others, because he's very charismatic, very, very social. He doesn't fit that typical mold of a serial killer. In fact, the way his kind of personality is, how charismatic he is despite his murderous intent, is a lot like real life serial killer Ted Bundy, how he was super charismatic and everybody was like, oh well, it couldn't have been him. Anyways, but James Gillies does not fit the typical mold, and that adds another layer of interest and another layer of depth to his character. And his motivations primarily lie within him wanting to test something, because when we were first introduced to him at the very end, it's just said that Gillies had a theory to test, and so he tested it. Didn't care that a life ended because of that experiment, didn't care that he murdered someone or implicated his friend in, this murder or anything like that. It was just, I have a theory to test, I'm gonna do it, which is terrifying. But, so James Gillies has this thing where if he has a theory or he has some sort of experiment that he wants to do, he'll carry it out. Doesn't matter who falls in the process, doesn't matter what stands in his way. He's going to remove the obstacle so he can test it, so he can play a game. And games become very important to him, especially in his comeback in season 5 in the episode Murdoch in Toyland, which this kind of gets more into Gillies as an antagonist, and him as an antagonist and his personality, they kind of coincide so well together, and it's kind of seamless how well the two fit together, that his games and his personality and everything that he does as a character and against the detective and Julia, we'll get there, and Julia, kind of culminates this idea of this is who he is, this is his personality, and this is what he does. It's not a huge deviation from what you would expect, but the way he does it is what makes it so unexpected. If that makes sense. Did I say that right? Did I say that right? Who knows? Gillies as a character, is he crazy or insane? No. I don't believe he is. But is he very dark, very twisted, and is his mind a deviant? Like, does he have a deviant mind? Absolutely. And that's what's scary about James Gillies, is because he's an unexpected villain, and it's not because of his physicality or what he physically does to people that makes him so scary. It's the psychological impact that he has on the main characters and the main cast that leaves such a gaping impression of this person. Despite him only having a handful of episodes throughout the course of the series, he leaves such a huge impression, not only on the characters in the show, but on the viewers when we watch it. He's a very psychotic person. James Gillies is terrifying not because of his personality, but because of his mind, if that makes sense. So we aren't privy to a lot of information regarding James Gillies' childhood. We know he's from a wealthy family, and we know he's very well off, and we know he's very intelligent, which suggests a very good upbringing. So how does someone with a very nice upbringing, very well off, has a bright future ahead of him, how did he just flip the switch and, kill people? How did he flip the switch like that? James Gillies, at the core of his personality, at the core of this desire to play the game and his desire to test these experiments, is because deep down he wants somebody out there who understands the depths of his mind, who kind of is on the same page as he is, even though it ends up being very twisted and definitely not the same. He finds that in Detective Murdoch, because Detective Murdoch was the one who was able to outsmart Gillies the first time and several times after. So he sees Detective Murdoch as not only this great enemy, but also as someone he kind of respects in a way, just because he's like, oh, you're a genius like me. You can understand how I think. And Murdoch is definitely like, no, I don't understand you. But the brilliance of James Gillies kind of is hiding the fact that he is alone. And he has no one he feels is his equal. He thought he had found that in Robert Perry, but as we know, Robert Perry was an insufficient partner for him, and Gillies disposed of him because of his incompetence, according to Gillies. So with this being said, getting back into Gillies as an antagonist, knowing this about his character and about his personality, it's very easy to see how he does these games and how he plays them. Because while, yes, Gillies does kill people and he murders people to bait Detective Murdoch, the main thing that Gillies does in this show as a character and as an antagonist is play with Detective Murdoch's mind. So the games that Gillies plays is very intricate, elaborate, very thought out. His intelligence and his brilliance is really shown throughout the way he plays the game, and he plays it well, because there's nothing left to chance with James Gillies. He's planned out every single move. He knows his opponent enough, like a game of chess. He makes one move and he anticipates how Murdoch is going to make his move, and he plans ahead, and he has so many different strategies that he plans out, just in case, well, if Detective Murdoch does this, I have this in plan. If he does this, I have this. He's so methodical and so detailed in his games that it's scary, because he's thought of everything and forgotten nothing. He's that good, and it's that scary. And during these games, it is proven that Gillies does not have any sort of boundaries. He has no limits of how far he's willing to go to play his game and to test his experiments. In Murdoch and Toyland, Gillies kidnaps a child just for the sake of drawing Murdoch out. He never planned to do anything to Veronica Bowden. She was never really anything special to him. He was just a way to draw Murdoch out. And again, his brilliance and simplicity is that he was like, oh, well, this is the child who's in the house I grew up in, but I know Murdoch's never going to check that. He's never going to think that simplistically, so I don't have to worry about that being a loose end for now. And he was right. Murdoch overthought it so much that he didn't even think to check the records of who had lived there in that house previously. The way Gillies, despite how twisted he is, the way he's able to understand how other people think and other people's minds is terrifying. Because not only does he understand his own mind completely, he's able to understand others. And that's terrifying in an antagonist. So Gillies takes this person. He baits Detective Murdoch. Murdoch falls for it, of course, and it begins this game with dolls. And Murdoch is left these little dolls that have twisted messages in them, and like the "Hello, Detective Murdoch, will you play with me?" I would be haunted for the rest of my life if I ever heard a doll like that. Anyways, got distracted. But Gillies, his main tactic is to get inside Detective Murdoch's mind to either incapacitate his thinking with fear or manipulation of some sort, or to get him off the trail of, oh, well, I'll divert him enough this way so he doesn't think about checking the past owners of this house, or he doesn't think about checking into the history of people he sent in jail, because I don't want him to find me at the first doll. That wouldn't be fun. So he diverts him enough and uses enough psychological manipulation that Murdoch is sent on a trail to find someone else, which in this case is the little girl that's missing. He finds Veronica, brings her in. Oh look, there's another doll. And this one's even creepier. And as Murdoch goes along, the more and more frustrated he is, and the more you could tell he's very unnerved. I mean, if I got a doll with threats on it or really creepy messages, I'd be very unnerved as well. But Murdoch, who's normally very composed and in control of himself and his emotion, for him to kind of unravel, even just layer by layer, shows how much Gillies had gotten under his skin and how much that manipulation and conniving just shows how much Gillies knew how to make Murdoch break. And of course, it goes on. They find Robert Perry's body, which again, I had said that Gillies disposed of his body out of anger, or because he was incompetent. He exposed it out of anger. And that's shown when, Robert Perry's body is found with his head sawed off. And because of the autopsy result, it's known that Robert had his head sawed off while he was still alive, while his heart was still breathing. And it's even said, there was anger at play here. Oh yes. Gillies was furious that Robert Perry not only outed him, but then took a deal to hang him and then hang Gillies and let, Perry live. So not only was Robert Perry a failed accomplice and a failed companion, Gillies saw him as worthless after that, because he wasn't good enough to keep up with the game. He wasn't good enough. He just wasn't good enough. There's nothing really else to say, is that in Gillies' mind, Robert was dead to him the moment that he outed him in the classroom. And as soon as Gillies escaped prison, I can almost guarantee that as soon as Gillies escaped prison and he already had his plan in mind, he went straight to Robert Perry and killed him. There's no doubt in my mind that's what happened. Robert Perry's death is kind of a showing factor that Gillies, as stoic as he is, he does have these emotions, these negative emotions, when things don't go his way. It's a little childish. He's a younger person. It's a little childish in the way he's angry when something doesn't go his way, or when someone fails him or upsets him. But instead of kind of coping with his anger or putting it in another path, he uses that anger to not only propel his game forward, because he could have just easily killed Perry and just done away with him easily. But Gillies, and this is one of the most terrifying thing about Gillies, as angry as he was at Robert Perry, still used him as part of his game to draw out Detective Murdoch. Throughout all that anger, he was like, no, I'm going to use this person. I'm going to use this failed experiment right here to test my current experiment and draw out my real opponent. He's a terrifying person. But people don't think of him as terrifying at first because of this enigmatic personality. And he's very witty and funny. And he makes a lot of jokes. He has a lot of dark humor, which also makes him a very good antagonist. It goes to where Murdoch discovers that Gillies has taken Julia. Gillies has observed Murdoch enough and watched him enough to know that Julia is a very important person to Detective Murdoch. Knowing that, Gillies, once again, back with the mind games, takes Julia and buries her alive, gives just enough clues and just enough hints for Murdoch to either find him or find Julia. And Gillies knows. He's like, I knew you would find me. I knew you'd come after me. And just the manipulation that Gillies puts on Murdoch, not only is it just a creepy, unnerving situation now with like all the dolls and this wild goose chase that he's been on, it's now very personal that someone very dear to Murdoch has been taken and has their life threatened by a person who couldn't care less. That's a terrifying situation, and Gillies revels in it. He enjoys it so much. He is laughing at Murdoch, teasing him, everything like that. He wants to see Murdoch struggle. He wants to see him suffer. And Gillies relishes the manipulation and control he has over Murdoch at certain points in their timeline, in their relationship. He enjoys it that much. Of course, Murdoch saves Julia, and Gillies is thrown in prison another time, and Murdoch asks the question, he's like, why come back? You could have walked away and nobody would have been the wiser. Why did you come back? And Gillies, again, very telling of his character and how he thinks he's the smartest person in the world, is that he says, I don't like to be bested. And he wanted another chance to see if he could outsmart Detective Murdoch. Another chance to play the game, to test this little experiment. And Gillies lost. Again. But he didn't seem all too worried about being, thrown in prison for a second time. And again, and it goes to show that he didn't have to worry because he escaped after that and was on the loose again. Gillies is nothing if not very persistent and stubborn in his own demented and terrifying way. But, and the next experiment that Gillies plays in this next game that he participates in, which again goes to show how brilliant Gillies is, and this is what makes him so terrifying. This is the scariest thing about Gillies, is that he's such a brilliant person, and the way he uses that genius is devastating. Because this next experiment that he does is that he kills Dr. Garland, Julia's husband. Kills Dr. Garland and frames Julia for his murder. Again, this is all one big mind game, because how else is he gonna hurt Detective Murdoch than targeting the woman he loves and threatening, basically threatening her with death, because if she's convicted of this murder, she will be hanged to death. So the pressure and just the pressure on Murdoch just at that fact, and him not being able to find her alibi, Julia kind of not really getting that this is a serious situation, because she's like, well, I didn't kill him. I have nothing to lie, I have nothing to worry about. I didn't kill him. And while that is true, she didn't kill him, Gillies had fabricated so much against her and had planned months and months ahead for this to happen. He planned enough to get a plaster mold for her face, to get these phone calls so he could fake a phone call from Dr. Ogden, so he could set up a fake alibi with a person under an alias, so that when she was needed to testify, there was no trace of her found. He had everything planned out to the T. But he had everything planned out to the T, and because of the situation, because Dr. Ogden was a beloved member of everybody at the station house and for Murdoch in general, there was so much that was a little overlooked. Just enough overlooked that could have been said, like, hey, no, this doesn't quite make sense. We need to take a look at this. But because of all the panic, the fear, and just because of that pure panic that everybody was feeling, trying to find a way to prove Dr. Ogden innocent, there was so much they missed in the evidence that Gillies left there for a reason, because Gillies, again, he messes with people's minds, he plays with their minds, and because he had that psychological approach, he knew there was going to be plenty missed in their investigation, and it was. And he was counting on it. He was counting on them missing things just because of the psychological and mental attack that he had on them. And it worked. And the most iconic scene with Gillies, when they're in the courtroom and Julia is convicted of murdering Dr. Garland, her husband, and she's sentenced to hang by the death. Murdoch is just in a frenzy of panic. He has no idea what to do, and then it's just a slow oh my gosh. It's so iconic, and I laugh, but at the same time, it's just like, that's so terrifying that Gillies was in a position to sit there unconcernedly, to sit there and openly mock Detective Murdoch, and just sitting there and clapping and just like, yeah, this was me, here I am. He exposed himself on purpose. If Gillies didn't love the game as much as he did, if Gillies didn't want to keep this thing going, he could have just left the courthouse without ever saying anything, and Dr. Ogden would have been killed, because they wouldn't have been able to find who did it. But because he loves the game so much, because he loves tormenting Dr. Ogden and Detective Murdoch, he loved it too much to let it go. Because of that, he shows up to the courtroom and makes himself known to Detective Murdoch in a very iconic way that's kind of like, it's one of those ones you're like, oh, like, oh my gosh, it's him, he's back. But at the same time, it's just like, that's absolutely insane. Like, so twisted for him to do that. But everybody loves it because that's just the type of character he is. And, you know, as soon as it does it, it's like, it totally makes sense that Gillies would be the one to set this up, to frame it, and nobody questions it because everybody knows he's that smart of a character. It's nothing out of the range that he would do. And because of the previous episodes he's been in, it goes right along his character and right along that antagonistic thing that he has, is that he has a theory to test and he did it. Doesn't matter who got in the way, doesn't matter who got killed. He wants to play the game, so he's going to do it however he can, messing with as many people's minds as he can. And he does it too well. And of course, in Crime and Punishment, the following episode where, you know, Murdoch is on a race against time to save Julia from the noose, the hangman's noose. And it's so cool. It's such a cool episode. As scary and terrifying as it is such a cool episode because it really shows James Gillies as a character. Like, his personality is just full throttle in this episode because he not only records a tape, a confession tape, saying, if you can get this to the police, she can be saved. Here's my full confession. You have it right here. the amount of confidence and just, that's such a chaotic move. If we really think about it, that's such a chaotic move for James Gillies to make. For him, knowing that he's been in prison three times? 2 to 3 times. Knowing he's been in prison, he's just like, yeah, I don't care. I'll go back again, because he had a theory to test. He wanted to see if Murdoch would willingly trade his own life for Julia's. And as James Gillies says, he says, I'm fascinated by the idea of love. That one line is so telling of his character right there. One, he doesn't really understand love. That falls in line with the sociopathic tendencies that he has and that mindset that he has. That he doesn't really understand those deep, heartfelt emotions. James Gillies is an emotional person, but it's not that type of emotion. His emotions are the joy of the game, the thrill of the game, his amusement from seeing his pawns, his pawns suffer and squirm and kind of try to fight him and beat him. And the anger when something doesn't go his way, or how he gets so disappointed when somebody can't play the game as well as he expects them to. Those are the types of emotions that Gillies has, and that overconfidence that he exudes in Crime and Punishment in this episode, where he's just like, yeah, by now you know all about this, and it's insane to see him at work, and for him to willingly explain everything, because he's like, well, I don't really want her to die, because I'm not done with her yet. Gillies never wants them to die, he just wants them to suffer, which is, that in itself is kind of more terrifying than a person who just wants to kill people. A person who just wants people to suffer and to be tormented is so much scarier, to me at least, than someone who just wants to kill people. It's, especially in a show, especially with an antagonist of this nature, like, it's such a good way to just build up the suspense, build up the real terror of this character. Because again, it's not in his appearance, it's not in his physicality, it's in the way his mind works. And in Crime and Punishment, Gillies just thrives. He thrives in that episode, and it's such an iconic line, and when he's like, welcome to the Murdoch trap, detective. When he says, we are going to have so much fun. It's so telling of who he is as a character, because it's like, all of it is one big game to him. He doesn't care if someone's life is really on the line. He doesn't care that he's tortured these people and like completely scattered an entire station house and everything like that. He doesn't care about any of that. He's just like, this is going to be so much fun. My game is in place. I've had this planned for months. I'm ready to execute it. Now let's play. And for him to play a game knowing that he's going to out himself, knowing that he's going to lose in the end, that's a whole other level of dark and twisted. Then people kind of catch on with his character, because it's like he intended to lose the entire time during Julia's trial, during crime, like that whole part, he intended to lose. And he was willing to be thrown back in prison or killed just for the sake of testing his theory and playing the game. I know I've said this so much throughout this analysis, but that's terrifying. That's absolutely terrifying. And of course, he's just tormenting and taunting Detective Murdoch as Murdoch is trapped. That's why it's the Murdoch trap. Murdoch is trapped, and he's listening to Gillies' tape, and Gillies himself is watching his tape play while watching Detective Murdoch, and he's just having the grandest time. And it's a grand old time for him. He just enjoys just tormenting Detective Murdoch, mentally and just psychologically. There's nothing that he enjoys more than that. But of course, Murdoch is able to save Julia. He makes the decision. He's like, well, I will trade my life for hers. So, but Murdoch is so much smarter than Gillies thinks. Even though Gillies has acknowledged him as someone on an equal level, someone who is just as brilliant as he is, Gillies still somehow underestimates Detective Murdoch's desire for justice. And Detective Murdoch's his drive to save the people he loves while still upholding the law the best he can. And he does just that. He's able to save Julia, the woman he loves, and he's able to take Gillies back in custody because he used his brain. He had a big brain moment. He used his brain to give the police officers, to give them just enough of a heads up and of a hint to find him. Murdoch is great. He's a brilliant man. I love him. Anyways, at the end of that, Gillies was shot in the shoulder and he was beaten a little bit, probably by Brackenreed. And that ends with him behind bars and, he's like tied and strapped up and he just keeps smiling. Because again, it doesn't faze him to be thrown in prison. It's just another part of his game, another part of his plan. He's just like, oh, I'm back here again. Now I gotta find a new way to break out. He's so unfazed by being taken at that point that it's actually just bizarre. And the next time we see Gillies, he's being transported to be hanged. And of course he's gloating and flaunting, basically like, oh, I'm not really gonna die, or kind of alluding like, oh, well, I hope I don't disappoint you at my hanging. Like that, he's gloating. Because even in that position, when he's handcuffed with his hands behind his back, even with all of that going on, he's still so much in control that it unnerves everybody around him. Like, it's almost frightening to see that a man about to die, with like handcuffed and in no position to have any power, is the one that's in most control of the situation that he's in. It also goes to show that Gillies, again, he plans for these things and his mind is 10 steps ahead of everybody. And while Murdoch can catch up to that, it takes a while for Murdoch to figure out like where Gillies already is. And while Gillies is 10 steps ahead, Murdoch's is like 5 steps and he's got to catch up while Gillies is still going. Luckily for Murdoch, he's a very quick thinker and he's very smart and he's able to catch up to Gillies. But it always ends up with somebody getting hurt. And Gillies doesn't care. And the most compelling, again, the wit and humor that Gillies has is unmatched in that show. And it's hilarious to listen to him, like, talk to the constable, like when he talks to Crouchies, he's like, oh, you're the one who shot me, didn't you? You didn't really do a good job at that. And, he just, anything to get under people's skin and, winking at random strangers just to kind of like get them unnerved and then get the police on edge, being like, do you know him? Like, why did he wink at you? He's like, I don't know. But Gillies will do anything in his charismatic personality to try to draw attention to himself and to draw attention to his plan. Because he admits to Julia that he's like, I'm not gonna die. I'm gonna live. And I'm escaping this place. And the most compelling part of A Train Ride to Kingston in season 7, is when Gillies talks to Julia on the train. Because Julia is obviously traumatized by Gillies. Not only did he bury her alive, he has targeted her more than once. He killed her husband and set her up for the murder and didn't really care that she was gonna, like, if she died or not. Like, she's very traumatized by James Gillies, rightfully so. And she goes to confront him, to talk to him, be like, well, and she tells him that, oh, well, I'm gonna get your brain and examine your brain after you're dead. And he's like, okay. You can tell that kind of throws him off because he's never really thought about someone analyzing him before. Just another interesting thought in and of itself. But the coolest part about that conversation, which both shows Gillies' kind of twisted darkness, like that dark mindset that he has, but also this really crude, dark humor, and it meshed together so well in that one conversation. You get all of it from him. You get everything about his personality, everything about his games, and everything just, oh, it's so good. And just breaking down that one scene, you can really tell that Gillies loves the game too much. And that's his downfall. He loves it too much. Because he tells Julia, like, you know, Julia says, oh, something made you. Something made you. And he's like, what am I then? Like, what am I? And she calls him a monster. And he's like, a monster? You know, he's like, oh, you think that? And, you know, and then that sixth sense of humor comes out when she was like, well, you've confessed to killing over 6 people. And he's like, one of which is your late husband. You still haven't thanked me for that. It's so wrong on so many levels, but it's so funny. But, you know, like, it goes off and, you know, she's like, well, you're gonna die. And I'm gonna be happy to see you dead when I pronounce you dead. And that's when Gillies is like, that's not gonna happen. And again, that quick manipulation, and all it takes is him, he's like, ask me why I want to live. Julia could have easily disengaged, realizing what Gillies was doing. She could have disengaged and walked away. But she just goes, why? She replies to that manipulation instantly because Gillies is always in her head because of how traumatized she is by him. And Gillies knows this and uses it to his advantage to even further get inside her head psychologically. When he said, ask me why I want to live, he said, because I'm not done with you yet. It's such a chilling line to hear. It's so terrifying in its simplicity of just saying, I'm not done with you yet. Because not only does that show that Gillies has not only planned this far ahead, but he has games and experiments planned for the future, for long term, that he hasn't enacted yet. His mind knows no bounds. And, you know, Julia slaps him and he starts laughing because he was successful. He was successful to get into her mind and get that fear resonating in her again. And of course, Gillies gets off the train by again using manipulation and bribery. It's a pure cunning that gets him off that train because he knows how people work. And so he's off the train, and, you know, that scene with Murdoch, again, he knows Murdoch. So he throws Murdoch off in the most bizarre way he possibly can. He's like, oh, what is a good devoted Catholic going to hate the most to get him from continuing to beat me up? I'm going to spew out some nonsense about, you know, oh, well, we share something special, which Gillies to a degree believed because he believed Murdoch's mind was on the same level as his. But he's like, well, how can I throw off this good, pure-hearted, devoted Catholic? I'm going to kiss him. And he does, you know, and it works. He throws Murdoch so off. Murdoch has absolutely no idea what to do. He's like, what? And Gillies is able to punch Murdoch, get him off him, and escape. And then he jumps off the bridge because he's like, I've got nothing to lose. From then on, it's kind of assumed that he's dead, even with no real proof. And it's kind of like it's really good. It was a good setup because it left not only Murdoch and the rest of the police and Julia, it left the rest of them saying, is he still out there? And it's like this looming threat of someone who you can't see them, but you have a feeling they're there. And especially for someone like Gillies, that's probably a very horrifying thought to know that he could still be out there planning his next move, and none of them would be the wiser. But again, he wasn't dead. I'm not thrilled with the way they handled things in season 10 when they brought Gillies back. But Gillies was brought back, and again, he plays this very manipulative and deceitful part of, and it's very cruel how he goes into Mr. Foley's head, you know, like he inserts like something into his sternum and like has an implant in his head just so he can communicate to Dr. Ogden and Detective Murdoch and be like, oh, the devil told me to do it. That's freaking terrifying. And it's very cruel to Mr. Foley because Mr. Foley, like, he has no idea. He genuinely believes he's possessed by a demon. Which in a way he kind of is. Because Gillies is a bit of a devil. But in the end, you know, it's one last attempt for Gillies to kind of play the game. And again, it begs the question of like, well, you escaped. Again, why didn't you just leave? But Gillies, when it comes down to it, Gillies loves the game too much to let it go. He has too much knowledge, too many experiments to test to let it go. And in the end, this last one was like a desperate attempt to get Murdoch to finish him off because he was in so much pain. Do I completely agree with how they handled that? No, but that's another discussion entirely. But the utilization of James Gillies as a character was done really well because despite him only having, I think, despite him having 6 episodes where he's on screen and where he's only mentioned in like a handful of others, I think he's only mentioned in about 7 others. So 13 episodes with Gillies overall. And he leaves such a huge impact on the show and on the characters that it carries throughout the entire, through the entire show. And, you know, for such a, you could kind of say a minor character, for such a minor character has such a huge impact, just speaks volumes about how well his character was designed and how well his character was applied to the show as not only an antagonist, but somebody that the viewers wanted to see again. What makes Gillies a very compelling character is that nobody expected him to be a recurring character. Because just like a lot of detective shows or a lot of crime shows, most villains or antagonists are kind of one-off characters. They're there for one episode and then they're either captured or killed or something, and then they're done and you never see them again. We see that a lot in shows like Criminal Minds, NCIS, Psych, other shows like that. And I think at first people thought that Gillies was just kind of a one-off character. And so after, you know, the episode in season 2, nobody really thought about him again. But then he comes back, and he comes back with a vengeance. Just pure revenge, trying to get back at Murdoch in season 5. And the way the game is set up so elaborately, and his reveal isn't until the end of the episode, like towards the end, that instantly sparked so much interest in his character because 1, he came back. 2, he was back with a vengeance. And 3, people finally were really starting to see more of this character and see like, oh my gosh, he is brilliantly terrifying, but this humor, this charismatic, dark, sick humor makes him likable. He's such a likable antagonist. And you know, like, it's gotta be like, I really shouldn't like this character, but you do. And he's designed that way. He's made so that you like him, so that you can't really hate him for what he does. One, because of his personality in general, and then two, the way he handles things. You can't hate Gillies despite the despicable things that he's done. And that makes him, one, all the more terrifying, and two, such a great character. And it goes to show that Gillies was an unexpected villain. A very unexpected villain. Because when we first met him, he didn't seem like the psychopath or sociopathic type of person. He just seemed like a normal university student who was, you know, like, oh, I want to know about this. And then he kind of got on and it was like, oh, well, this kid was the killer. Oh, well, he's gone now. And it's like, no, when he makes his appearance, you're automatically drawn back to the first episode when he's introduced, and it's like, oh my gosh, he had the capability to do this all along. We overlooked his character. Whoa, my goodness. And, you know, and you get drawn back into him. You know, and he's such a charismatic and charming person that it kind of negates some of those sociopathic, you know, tendencies. But then it gets drawn out again and you're just like, oh my gosh, he did that. And then it's like that balance of that charismatic and then that twisted dark side of his kind of, they coincide so well together, and it just makes him that much better of a character. Gillies knows exactly how to manipulate people, and he knows exactly how to make people tick, which is how he's kept himself alive for so long. Because he should have been killed after he was arrested the first time. But Gillies was able to see a situation. He saw he's literally the, I saw an opportunity and I took it. Poster child for that. He saw the opportunity, he took it. Should he have? Probably not, but he did. But he's like, oh, well, this man's dying. His wife is pregnant. I'll swap places with you and I'll give you a bunch of money. Since I'm a wealthy kid, I'll give you a bunch of money just so I can live and get my revenge. And he does. And then, you know, like, after that, when he escapes, he's able to weasel his way into people's lives just enough so that they don't notice he's there. But he's able to weave his way into their lives and set up these elaborate games and these schemes without anybody knowing until it's too late and he's already started it. And it's so cool because not only does he have the intelligence to back up his schemes and like the ideas and these theories, he not only has the intelligence to back up, he does have the physicality to back it up, but it's very much pushed to the side because the most terrifying thing about Gillies is his mind. But for him to be able to saw off the head of a man takes some strength. And for him to, you know, have enough strength to overpower like certain guards in certain places, and he has the physicality to back it up. Is he the strongest? No. But is he strong enough for what he wants to do? Yes. With all of that known about Gillies' character, with him as a, like, his personality and him as an antagonist, his character kind of is used as a cop-out in, like, for certain plot lines in the story, like killing Dr. Garland because, you know, Dr. Ogden and Murdoch wanted, you know, for them to get a divorce so that they can marry each other. Dr. Garland would not concede and he would not grant Julie a divorce, and then it's like, oh, boom, Gillies killed him. And while it works, that cop-out works so well for the story because it makes sense for Gillies to do such a thing. It makes sense for him to toy with Dr. Ogden and Murdoch that way. And it gets brought up again in season 7 when he's like, well, I removed the impediment to your happiness. Like, you should be thanking me. I killed him for you. And that's just another layer of manipulation because not only does he say that stuff to Murdoch, he says it to Julia as well. He's like, do you feel guilty? Because he wouldn't have died if he had never met you. Dr. Garland would still be alive if it weren't for you, Julia. He didn't say exactly that. But the fact that Gillies uses this kind of cop-out storyline to kind of move these plot points the way that the show wanted it to, but it's used in that instance in such a way that it works so well to Gillies' manipulation and the way he just loves to toy with people's minds. Because in a way you could say yes, he's kind of correct. If Julia had never met Darcy Garland, he'd probably still be alive. But on the other hand, if Gillies wasn't a complete, psychopath, if he wasn't like completely crazy, he probably wouldn't have killed him anyways. People don't normally kill people. But I think the most unsatisfactory part of James Gillies' character was the ending they had for it. It felt very rushed, very quick, and it seemed like they're trying to tie up too many loose ends at once. It should have definitely been drawn out more. I think Gillies as a character was built up for so much more than that quick and sudden ending. So it leaves a very unsatisfactory taste in your mouth at the way he's finally killed off. I don't really like it personally. I think they could have done that in a completely different way. Say love you. But anyways, that's just me. Some people might be satisfied that he was finally killed in the end. I was not. But what makes Gillies such a good character is that he had no limits. Anything he wanted to do, he did it. He was not afraid to kind of push and stretch the boundaries, to test Detective Murdoch, to play these games, to test his own theories and use these experiments. He wasn't afraid to really just push it. It's like the dolls is a great example. Like, he was not afraid to drag so many random people into this just to get Murdoch to play along. He wasn't afraid to bury Julia alive just to add an extra level of fear and the sense of urgency and panic. He wasn't afraid to kill Julia's husband and try to frame her and almost get her killed just for the sake of testing the experiment. He is never afraid to do whatever he wants because Gillies, again, he knows no limits. There's nothing he wouldn't do. And that's a terrifying fact about him. Gillies' personality wrapped up with his role as an antagonist in Murdoch Mysteries is what makes him a great character, because if he would have been this very sinister and dark person with no sense of humor and just so serious all the time, he wouldn't have been such a compelling, likable antagonist. And I don't think it would have gone over as well, if I'm being completely honest. The reason Gillies' character works so well is because of just this mindset that he has. Because he's terrifying. Don't get me wrong, he's absolutely terrifying and very sinister and sick. But the way he goes about doing his schemes, the way he kind of plays this arrogant, overconfident person with a sick sense of humor, and the level of intelligence that he displays is what makes him such a good character. If he wasn't charismatic, and if he wasn't as if even one of the aspects of his personality wasn't there, his character wouldn't have been as successful and it wouldn't have gone over as well. Because if you imagine James Gillies without that sick sense of humor and that ability to laugh in those serious situations, it wouldn't be the same story, it wouldn't be the same situations. Or if you take him and he wasn't as manipulating or conniving as he was, it completely changes the story. It completely changes who Gillies is as a character. So everything works so perfectly because it's so balanced. His intelligence is balanced with his charisma. His manipulative abilities is complementing this curiosity and this desire to test someone and desire to find someone who can play along and to really find him. like find him where he's at in his mind. He's like, I want somebody to play the game. And when he finds that, he relishes in it and plays it as much and as well as he can. Ultimately, Gillies is defeated and Murdoch wins in the end, which is a good feeling to have. It's like the evil doesn't conquer all, which is great. Gillies was a very sophisticated antagonist, and it worked so well within the course of the series. And because of how well done his character was made, he became, in my opinion, the best villain of Murdoch Mysteries. He was the best recurring villain there was. Nobody can really change my mind about that. Gillies was brilliantly made because a lot of the times people fear villains for what their actions are going to do. But Gillies is feared because of what his mind is going to do. The way his mind creates these schemes and these games, and then he takes action based off of this or based off of these theories he wants to test. That is the most terrifying thing about Gillies. It's not that he actually cares. It's not the fact that he's doing these things. It's the fact that he's thought of this. And that he wants to know so badly the result that he will do whatever it takes to do it. He's such a cool character. As terrifying as he is, he's such a cool character. Anyways, if you agree with me, you can let me know in the comments. If I've missed something, which I'm sure I have, and I know I'll probably hear about it since my family will be watching this video. If I missed something, you are free to let me know. Just be nice about it. If you disagree with some of the things I've said, that's fine too. If you agree with me, let me know. You can also, let me know if you disagree with me. I don't care. But that is my analysis of James Gillies. He's my favorite villain from the show Murdoch Mysteries. He's almost my favorite character from that show. But he was so well made, and while I don't agree with the ending, I respect the decisions made, and I am just so thrilled to have such a complex character who is known for his mind rather than his physicality. Such a cool thing to see in an antagonist, because most of the time we get the very intuitive and intelligent person as a protagonist, like you see in Detective Murdoch, but we often miss that in an antagonist, especially a recurring antagonist, which is why it's such a refreshing thing to have someone like Gillies in the show, and why I think a character like Gillies is important to have as an antagonist and a villain, because it draws out not only the potential of the protagonist to challenge him, make him rise to the occasion, but it also just adds so much depth to the show. It raises the stakes, it makes the tensions higher, it brings a new idea, a new field of creativity around the show and around the characters in and of itself, because with a character as smart and as just brilliant as Gillies was, especially with how he was able to execute his plans with perfect detail, you could do so much with a character like that. And it would make sense because it's been proven time and time again the character is capable of doing things like that. I absolutely adore characters like Gillies because they are so complex and because they make shows so much fun. This is going to be so much fun. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. My next analysis will probably be over Kylo Ren from Star Wars, so be on the lookout for that. I'm going to be kind of analyzing his character. I've posted my Katara and Prince Zuko analysis already, so if you haven't seen those, feel free to go check them out. I will leave links to one of them in this description. If you want to see future videos, make sure you subscribe down below. Leave me a like and a comment if you want. That'd be great. And I will see you next time, scholars. Bye!